Hello.
Mr. Fleischer, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Mr. Fleischer, please proceed with your presentation.
So I just wanted to quickly just speak on a bit of a point of order. I'm a cisgendered white man here, and I just want to speak directly to the minister on this. If a woman is telling you that the way that you're conducting yourself is coming across as sexist or demeaning, it's not up to you to argue the points that they're bringing forward. It's for you to listen and to understand and be a better man, essentially. So I'm going to leave it at that. I see a smirk from the minister as well, Mr. Peterson. So, good evening. I just want to first thank the committee for the opportunity to present some of my views on Bill 33. My viewpoints on this matter are my own as a private citizen, not of any political party or persuasion. I do, however, recognize the influence that previous speakers on this matter have brought forward. In particular, many of our academic and student leaders who took time out of their busy schedules, it is exam and end of term time, to speak against this bill. Also, think that this government relies a lot on public engagement. So I just want to state for the record that of the 45 speakers or so that were registered to speak, only one spoke in favor of this bill. And based on how they've conducted themselves over their COVID response, that should be an indicator enough to walk this bill back immediately based on the number of people who have showed up and said that this is not sufficient. My goal here is not to reiterate or attempt to rehash many of the points that were heard loud and clear by the government, and rather I want to use my time to tell two short personal stories and anecdotes. And I also want to just seek clarification on the continued use of the term shoulder check by the minister tonight and on previous nights. I'm not often driving these days because, we're staying home as much as possible. But when I use a shoulder check, it's an indication that I'm going to change lanes. So from that inference, I have to assume that the minister is embarking on a path and roadway to change for our post-secondary system. Mr. Chairperson, I've known the current minister, the MLA for Lac du Bonny, for a number of years, dating back to my time as a student leader years ago, as a staffer in this marvelous building that we find yourselves in today. And I want to share a story about an individual I met from his constituency. A few years back, I was canoeing in the Manitoba area. It's an area that is deep and true to my heart, and I sincerely hope that the government refrains from continued mining and permit explorations in the area as well. And we had enlisted the services of a guide, a Métis elder. He offers a shuttle service, Mr. Charlie Simard. And Simard, of course, he started talking politics on the 45-minute drive that we had to put our boats in for a 5-day jaunt down the river. And he said that he had found out that Manitoba Hydro was spraying pesticides on his traditional area that he gathered his medicine from. And he had no success asking them to stop. And he wrote to his MLA at the time. The boundary changes have affected that, Mr. Wasco. And the minister got action. He spoke truth to power. He heard a reasoned case to, tell the government to stop doing something. And he got action. He achieved that for Mr. Simard. And Mr. Simard, I don't think I'm not sure if he voted for the minister or not, but it tells me that if the minister can hear a reasoned case, they can speak to truth to power and that he would act. And I hope that this is the case tonight. I want to share another quick story. It comes from a quote from a few years back that I want to read into the record. This is from a few years back. But looking at the Bill 63 and listening to the presentations today, it seems that there were no consultations in regards to Bill 63, that was supposed to be happening in regards to taking the council and post-secondary and moving it right into the department. It seems that there were various clauses within the bill that is giving the minister quite the degree of power over said post-secondary institutions in the province in regards to programs and various other courses that are taught throughout the province. And I don't believe that taking some of those grassroots initiated programs, the powers, those experts in those fields, taking them out of the loop is appropriate. And I think I heard very loud and clear that there is many, many amendments that have been proposed by those institutions that, again, did not necessarily get a voice, that they're being affected directly. So with that, I'm hoping that the minister is going to listen to those bodies or those people that showed up today to give presentations to the committee tonight. And I look forward to accepting the amendments that I bring forward. That speaker in June 2014, Mr. Chairperson, was none other than the current minister. The member, Mr. Owasco, had identified serious concerns with the collapse of COPSI. He identified that the centralization of power in the minister's office in the decision-making process of advanced education was a bad thing. Mr. Owasco had stated that there was no proactive consultation with faculty associations, with students. He was concerned that there was only a technical briefing offered to these students and faculty associations. Mr. Owasco, I know, or Minister Owasco rather, I know that you put together a great critique of the former government on this issue. I know that you raised successfully the lack of proactive consultation on this bill back in the day. Consultation that did not occur before the bill was even drafted. That's the way you should do consultation. You nailed it. You've made the point entirely, and I appreciate that so much because it helped me research what was wrong with this current bill. I was thinking I would have to draft everything on my own, but it turns out that you had written everything I needed to see. And you don't even have to take my word for it. It's answered. Mr. Minister, as a curler, you'd know very well that it's not helpful to curl from behind the glass. Imagine this, the curling rink of Manitoba's post-secondary institutions. On the ice, you've got students, faculty, staff at the institutions working together as a team, pushing those rocks, working towards a draw. And your role as a minister is to ensure that the ice is prepared, that they have enough funding for the ice, that it's kept cool enough, that it's going to be an appropriate venue. But your job is not to tell them what color shirts to wear or how to throw their rocks at the end of the night. And so on the ice right now, you've got some of the best and brightest minds in Manitoba doing a great job helping to grow and assist our students and our community. And so let's give them a chance to do so. I will close by asking, and if you can explain to me and Manitobans, Mr. Minister, what changed for you? Was there a turning point from 2014 to the current day that changed your mind about the increasing role and the inappropriate role of a minister to make decisions for faculty and for post-secondary institutions? And I'm just curious, just to state on the record, I'm not interested in having barbed personal attacks go back and forth because I'm using your words here. And so I just want to know, what was the turning point for you? Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fleischer, for coming on today and bringing forward your presentation and also some blasts from the past and just in regards to transparency. I'm glad you brought some of this up because just to be fair as well, I remember a couple of meetings that you and I had back when you were the president of the Canadian Federation for Students, and then shortly thereafter, I believe you worked as a staffer for the then Premier Selinger of the time, and then of course 2016 you ran as an NDP candidate, which again I applaud everybody who has the courage and the conviction to put their names on a ballot. And so again, I just want to make sure that this is clear. This is not a dig. This is not talking down to anybody. I know personally how difficult and how hard the amount of work it takes for an individual to put their names on the ballot. And so with that, I don't only commend you, I commend absolutely everybody, no matter what gender they are, for putting their names on the ballot and looking to seek office for whichever political party that they see fit. In regards to Bill 33, I look forward to, again, working with post-secondary institutions. And as you've stated a few of them, but I will repeat, post-secondary institutions, students, student groups, faculty, staff, working with them on making sure that our post-secondary education here in the great province of Manitoba remains affordable, accessible, and sustainable. So thanks, Mr. Fleischer, again for your presentation.
Mr. Fleischer.
I wish I could say I appreciated the McCarthyist attack on political affiliations that we've seen over the past 2 or 3 days. I don't think it's appropriate for a minister of the Crown to be engaging in, and I'd like to put that on the record. I certainly wouldn't attempt to do that should your party lose government the next time and you find yourself presenting to a committee. I would not encourage anyone to engage in that manner. I would also like to just say that you have not answered the question about what changed for you when you identified successfully the issues of increasing control within the minister's office. I take it at this point you will not answer it, and we'll be happy to continue to press you to answer it in the coming days. And I'm sure Manitobans who are watching this and citizens who are reading this and answer it in the coming days will want to seek answers on that as well.
Mr. Altamar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fleischer, for your presentation this evening. Again, lots of information being presented and lots of really good perspective on what this bill is all about. So just to continue on down that line, who do you believe this legislation was written for, and do you see any particular value in Bill 33?
Mr. Fleischer.
Yeah, I'll cut to the chase on it. I think this legislation was written so that the minister could pick winners and losers out of departments. I think that they're setting themselves up to cut more and more. I find it ironic that he continues to say that he believes in an affordable and well-funded post-secondary system when the cuts keep coming. And so I believe that this is hampering the ability of institutions to raise fees to respond to the cuts of the government. And so it's an effort to move them closer to the 30% margin and target that was put forward in April of last year. We're fast approaching the first anniversary of that. It's a sad, dour anniversary, but I think the government was not pleased that they could get that in a short period of time. So they're playing the long game at this point.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's very informative to know about the minister's words and that he understands the process, but he wasn't able to follow with Bill 33. I think consultation is key. Do you think it's possible, to amend this bill so that consultation could be part of it? He's mentioned how he's very open. He has an open door policy. Do you think adding an amendment to add consultation as part of this bill would in any way enhance it?
Mr. Fleischer, very briefly, as your time is running out.
I suspect that the bill is past the point of consultation and resolution, and would encourage the minister to scrap the bill, start from square one, get a fresh sheet of ice out there, and work from there.
Thank you for your presentation. This concludes questioning for this presenter. I will now call on Jalen De La Cruz, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Ms. De La Cruz, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee. Evermore, thank you to all of the presenters thus far for speaking. To avoid redundancy, I won't be repeating much of what they've already mentioned so eloquently, although I will be sharing with you my experience with university governance and elaborating on the potential impact of Bill 33 on both administrators and the everyday student. As introduced, my name is Jalen De La Cruz, and I'm the president of the University of Manitoba Students' Union, as well as a co-founding member of the Manitoba Alliance of Post-Secondary Students. Within the institution, I also serve as a senator and a voting member of our university's Board of Governors. In the community, I also hold titles with organizations such as Manitobans for Human Rights and the Philippine Cultural Center of Manitoba. With that out of the way, while I am presenting to you today bearing many hats, I want to make it clear that my stance and opinions on Bill 33, the Advanced Administration Amendment Act, are a direct reflection of my intersecting experiences both throughout and apart from the student advocacy that I have been heavily involved in this year. These opinions are not to be invalidated. In fact, they are empowered by my previous work. Minister Wasco, as a former guidance counselor with nearly 2 decades of experience which precede your time within the legislature, I appreciate the patience and the consideration that you bring to the table, as well as the commitments to, for example, MSBI. With regards to Bill 33, not only have you openly invited student organizations into dialogue during your time this year, but you've also been able to show that you are listening by committing to an amendment, which explicitly safeguards student organizations, although we have yet to see it, including our provision of services, programming, and advocacy. With that in mind, I hope that you will continue to lend your ear and that this time you'll go a step further to truly take what we have to say to heart. During my time as a student advocate, I have seen tuition rise twice during a global pandemic. An influx of international students applying for hardship grants as a result of increasing fees and health costs, successive threats to operating grants, interference in bargaining affairs nearly resulting in a pandemic strike, and not only students, but administrators, faculty, and staff crying out for help. This year, the university community has been met with crisis after crisis, all while providing essential resources in the fight against COVID-19. It is truly miraculous that under these conditions, the hardworking folks who our institution are able to keep the ship, the hardworking folks running our institution rather, are able to keep the ship afloat time and time again. While admin won't be the ones to tell you this, Minister Owasco, the province has caused immense frustration in the ways of which they have chosen to use the power that they already have. Although it's difficult to imagine how much longer folks like them will be able to run this marathon with their limited resources and with this lack of trust between the institution and the province. What is keeping them going is the hope that their largest body of stakeholders, the students whose stories, struggles, and triumphs are shared directly with and directly witnessed and internalized with them. This is something that the government, any individual in a position outside of the institution, would not be able to duplicate. It's incredibly valid that the university community needs to see more from the province in order to build up that trust, and certainly Bill 33 is not the answer. Over the past few days, I have been reflecting on the words of those who have spoken before me and the responses that have been provided to their remarks. We've heard stories shared about equity, student services, and Manitoba's national reputation. One specific theme couldn't help but catch my attention: the shoulder check analogy. So please humor me for a moment, committee. A shoulder check to me is something with which the individual in the driver's seat typically conducts. Said individual, the driver of that vehicle, will typically know what their surroundings look like, how their passengers are doing, and whether that vehicle is in need of maintenance. Minister Owasco, if this is a shoulder check, to me that is problematic because, with all due respect, the minister is not in the driver's seat, grassroots university leaders are. Furthermore, the minister cannot possibly see how its passengers are doing when they are flying so far overhead that the university is merely a speck. Committee members, Minister Owasco, my story and the stories of dozens of thousands of other students is one of resilience. This resilience isn't solely ours, but it's the community as a whole. After my 2 years of serving in the UMSU executive, we have sat in dozens of meetings and 2 with yourself. While my formal time at the Students' Union is coming to an end, what I don't want to see is our future executives continuing to pour themselves into passionate, research-driven advocacy, only to see what the previous team once thought was friendly is now their greatest challenge. Minister Owasco, I know that you are not the individual who first championed this bill. I know that you've acknowledged our plea for a definition to explicitly safeguard democratic student unions and associations. I know that since you've taken up this role, you have met with students and listened to what we have to say. However, Minister Owasco, there is no shame in deciding differently from the past and reassessing what is currently in front of you. It is a loud statement to me that the majority of speakers here tonight and last Tuesday are in opposition of this bill and its threat to the university autonomy. I do want to note, since partisanship is on the table tonight, the one individual who I recognized who spoke against, or in favor rather, of this bill is a former staffer of the PC government and a volunteer at that. If the minister is truly accountable to taxpayers, this panel of citizens sharing their perspectives over these last few days should be more than enough. Without the appropriate accountability measures in place for the minister, we are not confident that this bill will be used for the purposes that have been shared with us. This bill should not pass without full consultation with not only students, but universities and colleges and their stakeholders to allow for a sound structure to be set in place. While my colleague spoke on the basis of our gratitude for the amendment, the explicit nature that we expect to see safeguarding student organizations in said amendment to be presented tonight is the same explicit nature that Manitobans deserve to see that administrators deserve to see in the accountability measures for the minister in light of Bill 33. Committee members, this is not about partisan politics. This is about the people of post-secondary building a relationship of trust that has been eroded over time and doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Dela Cruz, for your presentation. And as I've stated before, and I'll state again tonight, that that the commitment that I've made and our government has made as well in regards to transparency and having that collaborative approach remains, for sure. Talk about post-secondary institutions. I mean, that partnering will continue moving forward, for sure. You know, in regards to talking about tuition fees and student fees and that, those discussions will be had. And again, you know, I appreciate your comments on my shoulder check comment or words that I've been using for the past few weeks or whatever else, but it truly is to make sure that we're proceeding safely and making sure that student success is paramount. And with student success, what do we need? We need strong programming, and we also need to make sure that programming here in Manitoba is affordable. And so in a combination with those discussions and making sure the scholarships and bursaries, you know, for the record, continue to remain the highest that they ever have in this province. The student loans have been higher than it ever has. Why is that? Because we've got more and more people attending post-secondary institutions in this great province of ours. And, you know, I have heard your story as well, and I commend you for all of the hard work that you have done over the years, and you will continue to do. And you're definitely a leader in the community, and I commend you for that. And I just want to leave on this note that consultations will continue, those discussions will continue. I've heard your presentation today, and I look forward to the amendment coming forward relatively shortly. So thanks again, Ms. Dela Cruz.
Ms. Dela Cruz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Minister Wasco. I appreciate your comments. I would like to say as well that while we're keeping in mind affordability and access and the amount of loans and grants and financial assistance being accessed, it's important as well to think about the talent that we're attracting and the headlines that folks who are applying for the University of Manitoba, not only as students, but as faculty members and potential lead administrators are seeing prior to them deciding to make the move over here. Although, thank you again.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dela Cruz, for your words and telling your story and really sharing what you know, your post-secondary experience has been a little bit about. Thank you also for helping us to focus on this bill. I know there's been a lot of rhetoric, so I think it's important that we shift the focus again back onto what's going to be important for students, ensuring there's low tuition, accessibility. And I wanted to, you know, of course, remind the minister that with, you know, his bursary programs, the access program is gone, so that is something that makes life a little bit more inaccessible for students. But I want to ask you about, from your perspective, what that low tuition, what doors has that low tuition opened for you, and knowing that we've seen steady increases, what does that mean, having that increase to your tuition over the past few years?
Ms. Dela Cruz.
I believe that the answer to that question is multi-pronged. Thank you, Jamie, for asking that. I think that in addition to the low tuition and my own personal journey in post-secondary, when I came to a crossroads in high school, my senior year, I did really have to make a clear decision about whether I want to stay in the province, like many folks, whether I want to stay in the province or leave and study elsewhere. And the low tuition rate here did convince me to stay, not only because it was affordable, but because it was something that was also coupled with, at the time, what I believed was collaborative, was accessible, and was certain. Although as soon as I entered in 2017, that's pretty much when the news started circulating about tuition going up. And from that point forward, I was kind of stuck where I am now. Although I guess furthermore to your question, I think there's one thing to have low tuition, but there's also another to see how much exactly the government is investing in post-secondary themselves. And year after year, students are seeing that they have to pay out of pocket for what the government is choosing to keep within their own. And I think that's definitely an important aspect to maintain over the next few discussions on Bill 33.
Thank you for your presentation. The time for questioning is over. I will now call on Kevin Rebeck of the Manitoba Federation.
Mr. Chair, I have a question, and we're not at 15 minutes yet.
Mr. Gerard?
Yep.
Actually, the time for questioning is over. So we will now move on.
Usually the questions go for 15 minutes, and I don't think we've had 15 minutes.
No, it's actually 5 minutes, Mrs. Gerard.
Usually it's a total
15 minutes in total with the questions, the presentation, and then the questioning. So is there... So, Mr. Gerard, let me just clarify this. I'll just repeat this again. It's 10 minutes for the, up to 10 minutes for the presentation and up to 5 minutes for the questioning.
I've been at many committees before where people have extended it to 15 minutes if the
Mr. Gerard,
presentation was short.
Mr. Gerard, please go ahead.
Thank you. Jillian, thank you for your presentation. I'm interested.
Mr. Gerard, Mr. Gerard?
Yes? Yes? Can I proceed?
Mr. Gerard, I'm just getting...
Yes?
1 second. Mrs. Gerard, I just want to let you know that I was explaining to you the procedure, the present procedure, and I'll repeat that again. Questions are up to 10 minutes. Sorry, the presentation is up to 10 minutes, and the questions are up to 10 minutes. 5 minutes. And if you'd like to ask a question, you would have to ask myself, the committee, for leave to ask a question. Because the question period has already ended. Would you like to
I would ask for leave to ask a question.
Would you like to request leave? Mr. Gerard?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Gerard?
Yes.
Has asked for leave to ask a question. Is the will of the committee to... I hear a no. We will now move on to the next presenter, Mr. Kevin Rebeck, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Rebeck, please proceed with your presentation. Mr. Rebeck, if you can unmute. Mr. Rebeck?
Oh, he's in the video.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Rebeck, with your presentation.
Oh, sorry for that. Good evening, Chair, committee members, fellow speakers, and staff. I'm here to speak on Bill 33. I'm Kevin Rebeck, President of the Manitoba Federation of Labor, Manitoba's central labor body, representing the interests of more than 100,000 unionized workers in our province. We're pleased to have a strong working relationship with Manitoba's student movement and faculty associations. Strong post-secondary institutions and engaged students are vital to our province's future. I'm pleased that this government has listened to the Canadian Federation of Students, Manitoba, and student unions, and is committed to changing this bill to exclude fees set by student unions or associations. We would appreciate if this willingness to change direction happened more often with this government, as there's been a tendency to forge ahead with decisions that stakeholders have advised against. I think specifically of this government's planned changes to the Labor Relations Act in Bill 16, changes that have been opposed in writing by both labor and employers. By working with, instead of against, the people who will live with the decisions you make, government can create better rules and laws that meet the realities we face as a province. We appreciate that this government is acknowledging that at least one aspect of this bill requires revision. However, this bill still provides for the undermining of the autonomy of post-secondary institutions by allowing the minister to pick and choose tuition fees, and in effect, pick and choose what programs will be resourced and how. These decisions should be left up to post-secondary institutions and their governance structures. We appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of Manitoba's post-secondary students and those who ensure a high quality of education for them. We encourage this government to better support our post-secondary institutions with needed funding while keeping tuition fees low for working families. Years of freezes and cuts to post-secondary funding are having extremely negative consequences for students and staff alike. We encourage the government to put post-secondary education at the heart of Manitoba's economic recovery strategy. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rebeck, for taking the time tonight and coming and putting a few words on the record and your presentation towards the support of post-secondary education here in this great province of ours. I've made a commitment, and our government's made a commitment to make sure that through Bill 33, we are making sure that post-secondary institutions, and this is a recommendation from the Auditor General, that we provide a little more oversight over post-secondary institutions. And just to be clear to everyone, and I've stated this a few times throughout the last couple of evenings, is that we are working with our partners, our post-secondary institutions, and when they talk about student tuition and student fees, we want to make sure that they are having that robust discussions within their institutions, and then that being said, then coming and we're going to have a conversation about the rationale for whether the fees and tuition are increasing or decreasing, and that's where my shoulder check terminology has come in for now a few weeks, and so it's basically to have an additional conversation, and that after Bill 33 hopefully passes will continue. I have had an open door policy. Today is actually, I'm just quickly looking at my watch, today is actually my 100th day that I was told today that as Minister of Advanced Education, Skills and Immigration, and that open door policy will not change. I'm open to talking to all our stakeholders and partners within post-secondary institutions, and that includes, of course, students, student groups, and faculty and staff. And so you know what, I just want to say thank you for your role in what you do on a day-to-day basis as well. And thank you for your presentation.
Mr. Moses. My apologies. Mr. Altamar. Oh, Mr. Rebeck.
Thank you. And thank you, Minister. And I'm glad to hear you say you have an open door and that you're engaged in consultation. I just wish the consultation would occur in front of legislation. This legislation is seeing some amendments, and I appreciate that that's happening, but it would be better if this legislation was designed in partnership with faculty, with stakeholders, with students in advance of it being there. And you are giving yourself the hammer that, yes, there will be conversations, and I'm glad that will happen, but you're passing laws that allow you to be punitive to institutions if they don't agree with you picking winners and losers on tuition fees and rates, and that's problematic.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Rebeck, for your presentation. In your words, I think it's, again, very important that you've highlighted the differential classes of tuition that's mentioned in this bill, and I think that I still don't think the minister's clearly explained what that means in terms of what programs are going to get higher or not. And he's mentioned these conversations, but I think at this point, it's clear explanation really needs to be provided, because it's come up again and again this evening. I'm so glad that you spoke with us during the presentation this evening, because I know you represent workers, and you know the minister talked about making sure that our graduates and our students are ready to become workers. So I want to hear from your perspective, as someone who knows workers and their interests. What sort of things are you looking for from our post-secondary institution to make sure that our workers are ready for Manitoba labor force?
Mr. Rebeck.
Thank you. Yes, I think many young people pursue a post-secondary career. They're interested in advancing their education, and institutions are well placed to find ways to have fair tuition levels that aren't skewed by any government's perception of market needs that may mean that their costs will go up for certain areas as a disincentive, which could put education out of reach of students who are struggling to get by. So I'm concerned with what this legislation will do that may have an impact on people's dreams of their future, of their pursuit of post-secondary education, and what the cost to them will be.
Thank you for your presentation. I will now call on Mr. Ethan Burnell, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them to the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Ethan is not present. Sorry, Mr. Ethan Burnell is not present, so we'll move him to the bottom of the list. The next presenter was Mr. Tino Dogo, but the individual gave a written submission, so we'll forego Mr. Tino Dogo, and we will now, I will now call on those who who were not present the first time when I had called their name. Shirley Thompson. Shirley Thompson is the next speaker, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Shirley Thompson is not present. She will be struck from the list. So now we'll be moving on to Norson Harris of the Canada Sierra Friendship Society, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Norson Harris is not present and will be deleted from the list. I will now call on Ethan Burnell, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Ethan Burnell is not present and will be deleted from the list. That concludes the list of presenters I have before me. In what order does the committee wish to proceed with clause by clause consideration of these bills? Honorable Minister? the minister suggests in a numerical order. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed and so ordered. We'll begin by Bill 33. Does the minister responsible for Bill 33 have an opening statement? The Honourable Minister.
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would like to put a few comments on the record. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone that had contributed presentations on this bill over the last 2 evenings. Bill 33 enables the development of a more flexible and responsive tuition and student fee policy that will provide oversight to universities and colleges alike. The changes consider the balance between student affordability, institutional sustainability, and fiscal responsibility. I appreciate the opportunity to hear viewpoints on this legislation from across Manitoba, including student unions and associations, labor union representatives, and other campus representatives we have over the last 2 evenings. As part of our commitment to meaningful consultation, we will be submitting an amendment to this bill today to provide additional clarity to the definition of student fees. Legally, the definition excludes fees set by student unions and associations and are run independently from the institution. However, to address students' concerns regarding the scope of guidelines on student fees, the amended definition will clearly state that fees set by student unions and associations are not included. I would also like to note that the feedback provided to us over the last couple evenings will assist us with the development of tuition and student fee policies moving forward. And again, to reiterate that that policy, after the passing of Bill 33, will be consulted on. As many people have said, the details are in the policy, and we will make sure that that policy, the building of that policy will definitely be consulted on. So I'd like to, once again, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you to the staff and all the people who took their time to present to us over the last 2 evenings. So thanks again.
We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? Yes. Mr. Moses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, speaking towards this legislation that was tabled by the government. We know that you've been navigating this new normal during the pandemic, and we want to make sure that recognizing those efforts over the year. I want to, of course, just, in this bill regarding advanced education, I want to start by remarking about the situation at Laurentian University in Ontario, where hundreds of faculty have been fired and dozens of programs have been discontinued. That's a little bit of a parallel with the Conservative government in Ontario, and unfortunately, we're concerned about that being the future direction of education here in Manitoba. With regards to specific issues in Bill 33, we know that this bill creates barriers for folks accessing post-secondary education. We know the minister has said the bill will increase affordability and for education, yet their track record is that they've cut post-secondary funding year after year, and tuition goes up year after year. And Bill 33 will allow the minister to issue his own guidelines concerning tuition fees and student fees charged at universities. For colleges, these fees may be set by regulation. The guidelines within the regulation, within Bill 33, may limit a fee increase or require a fee to be decreased. And the government may also prohibit compulsory student fees. Some of these fees support essential services for students. And the minister has said he's going to shortly announce an amendment, but the way it's written and introduced is it talks, these fees could affect things like health plans and food banks and student union fees. We hope this amendment truly does eliminate issues for student unions. We've raised these concerns for many weeks, and we truly hope that this amendment will eliminate those issues for student unions and the fees that they control. We've continually heard from folks about Bill 33 and the negative impact that it'll have on our post-secondary students, faculty, staff, administration, but also very much the families that are involved in post-secondary education. We have concerns about continuous increase in tuition and the stress that it puts on their families. We've heard continuous concerns around this bill narrowing the window and the opportunity for people to enter university, making it less accessible. We hear concerns about the differential classes of tuition, which could allow one program to be charged far higher, far greater tuition than others. And we continually hear issues about autonomy and how this bill can weaken independence and autonomy of institutions, decisions made both by student groups and by faculty and administration. And of course, I think almost every presenter has made it clear that they would wish consultation had been done on this bill so much earlier, at the beginning stage when this bill was created, so that it could have been done in a way that works collaboratively with students, faculty, and staff to actually represent their interests and provide something that will actually benefit student life on our post-secondary institutions. I know that this mirrors some of the language in the Student Choice Initiative in Ontario that was struck down in the courts. And it's concerning just because we don't want another legal headache like that in Manitoba. We stand firmly in opposition of this bill today, and we sincerely hope that the minister takes your comments and your words seriously and hears your insights into not only looking at how this bill can actually be better, but for all other future bills in post-secondary education. I want to thank everyone who's registered to speak at committee over the last 2 days for taking the time to present. Your insights are valued, especially many of you who are studying and are faculty and working on the year-end work, who are working within post-secondary or advocating for better success. We appreciate that you, better than anyone, understand what students need to success in education. My colleagues and I understand that from speaking with folks within post-secondary that this bill ought to be scrapped. And so we do hope that this minister and his colleagues withdraw this legislation. Thank you.
We thank the member. During the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and the title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Also, if there is an agreement from the committee, the chair will call clauses in blocks that conform to pages with the understanding that we will stop at any particular clause or clauses where members may have comments, questions, or amendments to propose. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Shall clauses 1 and 2 pass?
No.
I hear no. Shall clause 1 pass?
No.
Pass.
Clause 1 is accordingly passed. Shall clause 2 pass? No. I hear a no. The floor is open for questions. The Honourable Minister.
I move that Clause 2B of the bill be amended in the proposed Section 1 of the Advanced Education Administration Act to strike out the period at the end of the current bill definition of in.
You have to read this word for word.
Oh, well, for goodness sake. No, it's not my fault. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to restart, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Minister. Go ahead.
I move that Clause 2B of the bill be amended in the proposed definition, in quotations, student fee, by adding, in quotations, comma, but does not include a fee set by or payable in respect of the student union or student association of a university or college, end quotation, at the end, period.
It has been moved by the Honorable Minister Owasco that Clause 2, bracket B, of the bill be amended in the proposed definition, quote, student fee by adding, comma, but does not include a fee set by or payable in respect of the student union or student association of a university or college, quotation at the end. The amendment is in order. The floor is open for questions. Mr. Moses.
Wondering if the amendment should be in regards to referencing any particular student union act or language that may have been provided in terms of previous legislation on student unions.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank my opposition critic for the question. No, because technically, legally, the bill in the way it was written originally was legally not including student union fees put forth by student unions or associations, and so this amendment clarifies that sentiment in writing.
Is the committee ready for the question?
Question.
The question for the committee is as follows. That clause 2, parenthesis B, of the bill be amended. Dispensed.
Dispense.
Shall the amendment pass?
Pass.
The amendment is accordingly passed. Shall clause 2 pass as amended?
Pass.
Clause 2 is accordingly passed as amended. Shall clauses 3 and 4 pass?
Pass.
I hear a no. The floor is open for question. Shall clause 3 pass?
Pass.
I hear a no. The floor is open for questions. Mr. Moses.
I want to ask about just adding that word sustainability. Does it have any implication in regard to the fact that any institutions may be currently unsustainable, and adding the word unsustainable to the bill may have any connotations about whether there are some that are sustainable or not?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask the member for a little bit of clarification as to what he's asking?
Mr. Moses.
The current bill describes, there's a moment to find it, describes the section here where it says, it's adding the word sustainable onto sustainable coordinated service basically provided at universities. Sustainable wasn't in the bill before. Does that imply that by adding sustainability, the minister is concerned about sustainability of our post-secondary institutions and needs to add the word sustainability into legislation to ensure that they are sustainable?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, we are not concerned.
Mr. Moses.
Okay, and I just also wanted to see if I could clarify just a small detail, but I just wanted to clarify the minister's thought process on how he would define the term sustainable. Does he mean sustainable as in he's worried about overdue costs and may therefore look at sustainability as a way to reduce funding to ensure that they're sustainable?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's all about making sure that they're being responsible, which they always have been in regards to balanced budgets and that.
Mr. Moses.
Sustainability is ensuring that they'll sustainably have balanced budget at all our post-secondary institutions. Is that kind of, just to get a sense?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So basically, yes, operating properly, yeah.
Seeing that there are no other questions, shall Clause 3 pass?
Pass.
Clause 3 is accordingly passed. Shall Clause 4 pass?
Pass.
I hear a no. The floor is open for questions. Mr. Moses.
Thank you. Got a few questions. First, on section guidelines, minister may issue guidelines in respect to, this is section 2.2, bracket 1. Minister may issue guidelines in respect of tuition fees or student fees. Is there a restriction on guidelines as in terms of time frame? Is this an annual guideline process?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank my colleague for the question. This is part of the consultation.
Mr. Moses.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I'm glad you mentioned consultation. And you also mentioned that just as we've been speaking over the last 2 days with presenters and in consultation in terms of the guidelines, I'm wondering if the minister has considered including consultation in the legislation. Since it's something that he's very amenable to, I want to ensure that proper consultation is done. So I'm wondering if that's something the minister is open to considering in this section of Clause 4.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I believe it's clear, so that'd be a no.
Mr. Moses.
I don't really think it is clear. It doesn't say consultation in this section of Clause 4. It doesn't say consultation in any other section of the bill either. So you've mentioned that you've been very open to it, which I'm actually genuinely happy about because I think consultation is essential. And so I want to ensure that that's going to be here and that the guidelines are going to be done in good faith with students and faculty. So I just want to know if you're open to having that as part of this section of Clause 4.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and in developing the policy in regards to the guidelines to tuition fees and student fees, and that the consultations will be happening, so it does not need to be written in statute.
Mr. Moses.
Okay, I'm glad that they will be happening. That makes me happy. I would be far more reassured, and I think a lot of the presenters that we've heard of the last tonight and previously the last 2 nights would be very much more assured if it was written down here in the legislation, the same way they're reassured once they knew the actual text of the amendment. So just want to put that to the minister if he's considering ways to strengthen this bill as he just did with the amendment. My next question is on section 2.2, bracket 2, in regards to guidelines that may specify the amount of student fee that the university makes compulsory students pay is an amount that exceeds the guidelines. So essentially, student fees student fees shouldn't exceed the guidelines. I'm wondering, again, will these student fees be in consultation with students because they're the ones who are essentially paying for them, and will that section be in direct consultation with students? Again, could that be put in the bill?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the details of the various policy will definitely be consulted on, and that will include the groups that I have mentioned for a few weeks already in regards to student groups, and faculty, and of course the post-secondary institutions themselves.
Mr. Moses.
Thanks for that. I just want to reiterate the fact that in the amendment you reference student fee, the student union and student associations, so they're going to be existing in this bill. And I wonder if those student union and student associations could also be referenced in this section as groups to which the minister must consult with before guidelines are set, as in this section, Clause 4, 2.2, bracket 2.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question that the member is asking is actually covered in the amendment, and so then it does not need to be included in this clause.
Mr. Moses.
I recognize that the amendment excludes student union fees. However, the other student fees that are included in this bill, such as lab fees or library fees, ought to have consultation with students, the ones who are going to be paying them. So I thought an appropriate group to consult with would be student unions or student associations. But since there would already be mentioned in this bill, I thought that there would make logical sense that they could also be mentioned in another spot in this bill, in the section where it talks about compulsory student fees.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the policy that is going to be developed for tuition and those student fees are going to be consulted on with student groups such as unions and associations and faculty groups, as well as post-secondary institutions themselves.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you so much, Minister, for clarifying that you're willing to say that you'll consult, but you're not actually willing to put it in writing in the legislation. So thanks for that confirmation. I want to ask now about section 2.2 bracket 3, which talks about the guidelines the minister must direct the Minister of Finance to deduct. In the current section of this section in the current legislation, it references it being not above the average of Western Canadian tuition. And that language in the current bill ensures some limit in terms of what the tuition increase would be. Now, this obviously removed in this bill, which means that there's no limit to the increase in tuition. I'm wondering, first of all, if that can be added back in to protect students from drastic increases in tuition. First of all, that would be my first question.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague for that question. In regards to the policy that will be stated within the policy with consultations with students, student groups, faculty, and the post-secondary institutions themselves, we've made a commitment to make sure that our tuition here in Manitoba is the lowest west of Quebec.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you for that, making that commitment. I think that's important to have low tuition. It still doesn't ensure that our increases in tuition won't increase dramatically. The previous language, having it not higher than the average of Western Canadian provinces, ensured that we wouldn't see a dramatic increase in tuition. For example, the next closest Western Canadian province is over $1,000 in average tuition, more than Manitoba. This legislation means that the minister could increase tuition $1,000 on average in 1 year and that would be legal. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying that's what the legislation could allow. My question is the minister okay with that sort of drastic increase in tuition as the bill is currently stated, or could he refine it to protect students by adding in some of the old language?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So within that policy, when we devise that policy and consult on the policy, that will be that protection will be put into that policy at that time.
Mr. Moses.
Why it's being moved from the legislation into policy?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member for the question. It comes down to flexibility, and so if we put it right in the statute, then that way you've got to then open up the bill, and then this way, if it's written in policy and again consulted on, that will be covered within the policy.
Mr. Moses.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. The Honorable Minister Peterson, on a point of order.
On the purpose of questions on the bill is it would be actual verbiage in the question, in the clauses. It is not about debating the bill. The member from St. Vital is now debating the bill, and we have time to do that in third reading. If he has problems with a specific language of the clause, that's what he should be asking about, not debating the bill.
Mr. Moses, on the same point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to speak towards this point of order. I think it's the questions that I'm bringing up, I think, are very pertinent and very important. What I'm asking is to clarify the language and the meaning of the words in the bill. For example, my first question was around, one of my first questions was around the word sustainability and what that really meant in terms of impact on this bill. I just asked about why it's being taken out, some language is being removed from the current bill and replaced with different language. And that language has a specific impact on the bill and how it affects students. And so I feel, in my opinion, that the questions I'm asking are not debate. It is specifically around the clarification of the language in the bill and its impacts on students and our post-secondary institutions.
So this is not a point of order. It is a dispute of facts, which relates to the questions, to the specifics, to the clause, but it is not a point of order. Are there any further questions? Mr. Moses.
Sorry, I think we got cut off. I just wanted to clarify your last response about it being in regulation was around the flexibility. I just want to ask, that's what you're saying around the flexibility of it being not in the legislation and in the regulation, is that correct?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and yes, that's correct. That's why we're going to put it into policy so that it's more flexible. And as you may or may not know, policy here in Manitoba can definitely be consulted upon, opened up, discussed, multiple times, as opposed to having to go and open up the legislation.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm glad that that's brought up. And I see that in this section where it refers to those guidelines and the minister directing those guidelines to the Minister of Finance, that since they're not in there, it must mean that with that flexibility, the minister is open to not at least being in line with the Western Canadian average of tuition. He's at least open to that possibility. He says he's flexible, so that means if he's considered that it might be at least a bit higher than the Western Canadian average of tuitions if it's changing that legislation. Just saying that's kind of inferred, I assume, by your last response.
The Honourable Minister.
No, unfortunately, the member is incorrect. We're making a commitment to make sure that our post-secondary institutions here in Manitoba remain affordable and and which all post-secondary institutions have the strong programming. So with that, we're making sure that our student fees and student tuition will remain third lowest in all of Canada, the lowest west of Quebec.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to section 2.2 bracket 2 again, the compulsory student fee. I just want to ask about the nature of the word compulsory. Does that mean that all students, student fees that might be compulsory, like a lab fee or a library fee, may change from being compulsory for all students to only being optional for some students?
The Honourable Minister.
Now I've got both of you guys. Oh, okay, thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so in clause 2, when it says that the amount of a student fee that the university makes compulsory for a student to pay is an amount that exceeds the guidelines. So that is where a university, if they make a compulsory fee and it is exceeding the guidelines, then basically that's not going to be allowed.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you. Then I'll move over to section 2.2 bracket 5, where it says the minister may make regulations respecting tuition fees or student fees set by the board of a college, including regulations prohibiting a student fee from being compulsory. So I'll ask my question again. Does this mean that a student fee or tuition fee that is deemed compulsory will be made non-compulsory or optional by the minister?
The Honourable Minister, would you like him to repeat the question? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the member for the question. In regards to post-secondary institutions making fees compulsory, this is something that came from the former NDP government, where even though they had capped tuition, they actually didn't put any guidelines or rules in regards to student fees. And so this will prohibit post-secondary institutions from making new compulsory student fees and overreaching outside of those guidelines that we would have discussed within the policy.
Mr. Moses.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the minister is saying that student fees that are currently compulsory may change to non-compulsory under this bill. Because you're saying that there was an issue with student fees possibly becoming too high, so they may be reviewed by the minister and become non-compulsory.
The Honourable Minister.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to the situation that the member had brought up, in fact, with tuition fees and with student fees, there could be a potential for something like that to happen. So that's why we need to make sure that when we are developing the policy and having those consultations with those different stakeholders, that's why that policy is written, to make sure that we're protecting students moving forward.
Mr. Moses.
So to clarify one more time, current student fees, library fees, lab fees that are compulsory now could be non-compulsory, could be optional in the future after this bill passes.
The Honourable Minister.
Technically, yes, but again, that will depend on the outcome of our consultations in developing that policy.
Mr. Moses.
That clarification, I understand now. It's a bit concerning, but I digress. I will go on to section 2.2 bracket 7, guideline or regulation. Section B, it says establish different classes of tuition fees or student fees may apply to differently to different classes. I'd like the minister to define, first of all, define classes and what classes of tuition are.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague again for the question. That as well will be part of that consultative process on the developing the policy.
Mr. Moses.
So the minister can't define what a class of tuition is? Is it is it a block of tuition that's determined by a program or a faculty? Or what is a class of tuition?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to clarify, In the past, it was in the legislation so that if a professional program wanted to come and technically raise their fees for whatever reason, it would be them coming to me and having, or my department, and having those discussions as far as that would be an allowable piece. But again, this is something that would be written in the policy, and that policy would be consulted on with all those stakeholders that I've previously mentioned many times.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you for that. I'm just trying to better understand it just so that I can speak accurately about it. So you said it's a professional program that might come to you and suggest something. Okay, so I honestly want to understand this. Is this like a faculty that might come to you, or what are you referring to?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did use the word professional as an example, but definitely it could be a program, it could be a faculty, it could be a professional program, and that would all be written in that policy and consulted on before that. And this would be them doing what they're sort of doing in the legislation now, where they would have to then come to discuss those things, but this would be written in the policy.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you. So a class of tuition, so like a faculty, for example, might come and say that to you, or you might go to them, say that tuition ought to be this amount. In consultation, then it would increase or decrease or whatever it sees fit in consultation. I'm getting that clear?
The Honourable Minister.
Correct. Post-secondary institutions would have those discussions within their group or institution with their stakeholders within, and then determine what they're sort of asking for, and then that's where that would be written in the policy, and then have it, additional consultation on.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you. And I want to just clarify on the classes of tuition. When it talks about that, like you mentioned, that could be a faculty, for example. Is that a faculty that would, for example, that faculty and it's mirroring contemporaries at other institutions? So, for example, the Faculty of Arts at U of W and U of M and Brandon, would they all have similar, or would they be separate institutions? So the increase might happen higher at U of M and then lower at U of W and then higher in Brandon, or?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of the questions that the member I know is well intended as far as the questions. Some of these are hypothetical questions right now, but that being said, the post-secondary institutions are the ones who will be setting their tuition fees and their student fees, and then we will be having that discussion when we're writing it into policy and consultation with those various different groups.
Mr. Moses.
So I just want to clarify again, you can have different classes of tuition possibly within one department. For example, faculty of environment might have something for geography versus environmental sciences. They're all within the same faculty, but different programs might have different increases in tuition.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, the legislation is put into place so that the policy that's going to be consulted on and discussed is flexible for those post-secondary institutions. So again, little bit of a hypothetical situation that the member is bringing up, but in reference to a situation like that, and I'm hoping the member doesn't continue to come up with other hypothetical situations, but those will be written in policy, and those policies, before they're written, so-called in stone, will be collaborated and consulted on.
Mr. Moses.
I don't intend to come up with hypothetical situations. I want to know honestly about the definition of class, because that can have a big impact on whether it is one program or an entire faculty or department. You know, the Faculty of Arts has a huge variety of programs within it. You know, music, science, it's a huge variety of programs. And if class is defined as the broad or is defined as the narrow within this legislation, it makes a huge difference in terms of the impact and the differential tuition increases. So I just wanted to get as much clarity on this before it becomes law, so that everyone knows, everyone who's impacted knows the impact of it, how the minister defines class in terms of this legislation.
The Honourable Minister.
So I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the opposition critic for a little bit of patience as well on this. So basically, with this piece of legislation, we're bringing forward the opportunity for post-secondary institutions to have some flexibility in, I know the type of question that he's asking, and I know that his intent is absolutely genuine. I guess it's so that if situations arise 2, 4, 5, 10 years from now, it's to make sure that the post-secondary institutions have that flexibility to put into policy different things that they may see after consulting and having those discussions within their own institutions. They might see that they need the flexibility to make some changes within those various different programs or faculties or whatever they see fit. But then this is going to have them come back and be able to have that discussion with my department as to the rationale for why. And so that they're having those discussions, they're asking for these changes to be made. And the reason why it's going to be into policy is so that they have the utmost flexibility for years to come, because of course nobody has a crystal ball, and so that they're able to do that. And then they would have to come back with fairly decent justification, and that would all be done with extensive consultations with all those groups that I mentioned before. And I'll repeat it just for the record: student groups, faculty, and the institutions themselves.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you for the answer. I appreciate that. I did want to just say that I don't think a clear, very precise definition of class was provided, which perhaps is intentional, so that it's a little bit vague to provide some flexibility, I suppose, as the minister was alluding to in terms of future uses for this section of legislation. So a little bit of vagueness in the bill. Yeah, I guess that's, you know, the way it is. I suppose many people would like to have a little bit more clarity what it is, since it is a new section. There's a lot of concern about what the impact of that might be.
Are there any other?
Oh, I ask that as a question.
The Honorable Minister.
So the member is, I'm not sure if the word accurate is the right word, but the fact is that we want to make sure that there's flexibility so that if every hypothetical situation would be technically dealt with in that policy. Because I think if you tried to write it into a piece of legislation, you couldn't do it. So that's why we're allowing this to go into policy, to have those consultations with the various different groups and stakeholders, to make sure that there's clear direction and a clear position moving forward, whether that's various different classes, programs, or faculties. But that would be done in consultation with all those stakeholders within those post-secondary institutions.
Mr. Moses.
Thanks. On clause C of that 2.2 bracket 7, it just says exempt, that guideline or regulation may be exempt its tuition fee or student fee or a class of them from this application of this section. Can I ask how that becomes determined, what gets exempted?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, that as well, if you read subsection C, it actually states fairly clearly, and that will as well be written in that policy. Because as you had heard, many, and I probably shouldn't elaborate on this, but I'm going to anyways, some students during the presentations over the last couple days, they made it fairly clear that certain student fees that are compulsory, which are put forward by post-secondary institutions, actually some of the students that spoke at the presentations actually don't want to see those fees decreased at all. So again, that will be written into that policy.
Mr. Moses.
Okay, I think I understand that section in regards to some classes of tuition fees being exempt. I'm also wondering, and sorry if I'm confusing this again, please provide some clarity about the exemption of tuition and student fees in relation to section 2.2 bracket 5, where you said they may be optional in some cases. I'm wondering if that optional is similar to being exempt from the tuition fees. I'm just wondering how those, because the exemption is similar to kind of opting out in some cases. I'm wondering if the tuition and student fees optionability in section 2.2 bracket 5 conflicts or combines with section 2.2 bracket 7C.
The Honourable Minister.
Chair, so the legislation is written to the point where this gives the institution and the department the ability to go forward and produce and consult on that said policy.
Mr. Moses.
Thank you. And when you said the institution and the department, you meant the Department of Advanced Ed or like the faculty department?
Honourable Minister.
So this gives the ability, again, as stated before, the flexibility to be able to, for the institutions, to be able to work within themselves to come up with through the consultative process, to come up with the policy, so that again, when it comes back, the students are first in mind to protect students.
Any further questions? No? I hear no. The Honourable Mr. Moses.
Already?
Yeah, so I hear, okay, all those in favor of clause?
No.
All those in favor of clause 4, please say yay.
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 All those opposed, please say nay.
No.
In my opinion, the yeas have it. Mr. Moses, on recorded vote.
Recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote has been declared. Okay. A recorded vote has been requested. For the information for all members of the committee, recorded votes will take place in a similar way in those in the chamber. So what do we have to wait for? No, what, we don't have one of our members here. Okay. All those in favor of the committee room, please rise with their hands. Raise their hands. But we should be able to, because I'm the tiebreaker.
Yeah, you raise your hand. Okay, 1.
Okay.
Okay, next.
Okay, all those opposed to the committee, all those opposed in the committee room, please raise their hands.
1.
I now will call for those participating virtually in alphabetical order. Please indicate if your vote by clearly stating, I vote yes or I vote no. Mr. Altamar.
I vote no.
Mr. Altamar votes no. Minister Peterson.
I vote yes.
Mr. Peterson votes yes.
Ayes 2, nays 2. I don't need to pause.
Okay. In the event that a tied vote, presiding officer are guided by the principles of the voting to maintain a status quo. As Bosch and Gagnon notes on page 238, 328, this entails voting in the following fashion. Whenever possible, leaving a matter of open for the future consideration and allowing the further discussions by the House. Whenever more further discussions is possible, preserving the possibility that that matter might somehow be brought back in the future and we decided by a majority of the House, and leaving the bill is in its existing form rather than causing it to be to be amended. In this case, the status quo in the original clause in the bill, I must therefore vote in favor of the clause now before this committee. Clause 4 is accordingly passed. Shall clauses 5 through 9 pass?
Pass.
I hear no. Mr. Moses? Shall clause 5 pass?
Pass.
No.
No, I hear no.
Pass.
On division.
On division? Clause 5 has passed on division. Shall clauses 6 pass?
Pass.
I hear no on on division. Clauses 6 is pass on division. Clause 7. Shall
Pass.
clauses 7 pass?
Pass.
I hear no. Mr. Moses? On division? Clauses 7 is passed on division. Shall clause 8 pass?
Pass.
I hear no. Mr. Moses? On division? Clauses 8 is accordingly passed on division. Shall clause 9 pass?
Pass.
I hear no. Mr. Moses? On division? Clauses 9 is accordingly passed on division. Shall the enacting clause pass?
Pass.
I hear no. Mr. Moses? On division? The enacting clause is accordingly passed on division. Shall the title pass?
Pass.
No, I hear no. Mr. Moses? On division? The title is passed on division. Shall the bill be reported?
Agreed.
Oh, should the bill be reported as amended?
Agreed.
Agreed. And the bill shall be reported as amended. Okay. So now we'll go into Bill 34.
We will now continue on with Bill 34, clause by clause. Does the minister responsible for Bill 34 have an opening statement?
I do.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you to the committee and those in attendance today, including all our staff that have stayed here late again. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank everyone for being here with us on the proposed changes to Bill 34, the University College of the North Amendment Act. The bill grants the University College of the North Governing Council the authority to manage parking on the institution's property through bylaws. Examples of parking bylaws include parameters on hours of parking, signage, fees and charges, and a removal of vehicles found in contravention. These changes provide the University College of the North with greater autonomy over parking in a way that is consistent with other publicly funded post-secondary institutions. I am also appreciative of input received from the University College of the North that prompted the development of the bill and look forward to its speedy passage. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? Mr. Moses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to briefly say that I think it's essential that we continue to invest in University College of the North. Growing our northern economy through education is a key part and ought to be a key part of our strategy for economic development in the North. I know that so many people are struggling across our economy. Education is a way that they're looking and doing that. That's even more amplified in northern Manitoba. In consultation with people I've reached out to in UCN and with our northern MLAs that I've talked to as part of our caucus, they've all stressed the importance of UCN. So I do think that that's a really important part of our economic growth and our education strategy for Northern Manitoba. And I am looking forward to the day I can actually visit their campus, because I haven't been able to do that yet. It's just travel restrictions. I've been staying close to home. But look forward to that. And again, want to thank not only all the people who are interested in Bill 34, but all the people who have stayed through all of Bill 33's discussion over the past 2 days, all the staff, all the people who've watched online, and all the people who have voiced their concerns over the last few days. Thank you.
We thank the member. During the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and the title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Shall Clause 1 pass? Clause 1 is accordingly passed. Shall Clause 2 pass? Clause 2 is accordingly passed. Shall Clause 3 pass? Clause 3 is accordingly passed. Shall the enacting clause pass? The enacting clause is accordingly passed. Shall the title pass? The title is accordingly passed. Shall the bill be reported?
Agreed.
The bill shall be reported. The hour being 10:31, what is the will of the committee?
Committee rise.
Committee rise.